Good evening. Tonight we are going to discuss a practical step you can take to start incorporating magic and Wicca into your daily life. Now, there are a lot of things you can do, from meditation to reading the tarot to a lot of different activities. But one of the first things people want to do when they start pursuing Wicca or a magical path is setting up an altar. So we're not going to discuss setting up the altar itself. We are going to instead focus on what your altar is. So what's underneath all the tools? What's underneath the altar cloth? What do you have that you're going to start to build your altar on? Because your altar needs something to sit on. Now, yes, in theory, you could just build your altar right on the ground, right on the grass, or right on your living room floor. But most of us want it on something. So before you decide what you can use as your altar, you need to decide where that altar is going to be. If you're lucky, you will be able to practice outside, but not all of us have that opportunity. So I've discussed in the past having a space for magic and how sometimes you just can't make outside work, whether it's because you don't have access to outdoor space or maybe your climate is not conducive to outdoor practice. I know here it's 40 below for a significant chunk of the year, not really a great place to practice magic out of doors. So, first you want to decide if you're going to be indoors or outdoors. Maybe you're going to be a little bit of both. So, that will help you determine what kind of surface you need. You also have to decide if you are going to be creating an altar that is portable or an altar that is exactly where it is, something you can't move. So, on the portable side, one of my favorite options I don't have here today, but one of my favorite options is either a chest or a trunk with a flat top. So you can store all of your altar tools, all of your altar cloths inside that trunk and set them up on top of that trunk as long as it has a flat top. That is an excellent idea for people who need to be able to move it or people who need to be able to store it. Maybe you don't have a place that you can set up your altar for a long period of time, and that's fine. So a chest or a trunk that has the ability to put your altar on top and enough storage space for all your altar tools is ideal if you need to be able to move it a lot. So if you're going to set up indoors, then you might need something like a small side table or a coffee table. These work perfectly. You can do either a large one, a small one, a medium size, whatever works for you and where you might want your altar. Now, something like this doesn't really fold up, it doesn't store very well, so it's completely fine to have an end table that you set up as your altar when you need to, but when you don't need to, you put your lamp on it or whatever. You can also look for something like this, which is a folding table. This came in a set of 4, and you can just use folding tables that set up really easily. Okay, so they set up, no problem. Use it as your altar. When you're all done, fold it back up, store it away. Those work really well because if you're not going to need it every single morning or every single evening, you can just put it away and only pull it out when you need. You might only need it once a month, you might only need it once a week. However you practice, you may not need it constantly enough to set something up that's a little more solid. Outdoors, there are a lot of good options. One of my favorite things is camping tables. That's what this is. This is a camping table that folds up into a case so you can store it away. You don't need to have it out all the time. It's a really nice camping table. This one happens to have chairs, and that's really good if you have someone practicing in your home or a friend who has a disability and may need to sit at the altar table. So a lot of people will tell you you shouldn't sit down at your altar, but maybe you need to or maybe you just want to. So if you are someone who needs to be able to sit at your altar, that's a really great option, especially if you practice outdoors, because in this case, these chairs just store inside it. They just fold inside as you fold that up, and you can use that as your altar. There are smaller ones, there are larger ones. You would pick the size that works best for you. I like this size if you are doing readings at your altar, so for example, tarot readings. I like this if you have multiple people using the altar because it is nice and large, so you can have multiple tools. If everybody is using that altar. They can put their own personalized stuff on it because it's large enough to accommodate more than one person. Something like this may not work as well if you have more than one person utilizing the same altar. And that's fine, by the way. You can definitely have more than one person using that altar. It works perfectly fine. And another thing I want to mention is something like this. This is a tree trunk. This is actually used to be a tree once upon a time that was cut down. If you have something like this on your property, it can be an altar. Take your altar cloth, throw it over there, boom, altar. It may not be big enough for what you want, but for a temporary outdoor altar that you just want to use in the summer, it actually works really well. So you don't need to cart your entire altar outside every time you want to set your altar up outside. So you can just bring your essential tools, use this, and then take everything back inside. You don't necessarily have to set that up in a permanent way because it's just a nice little trunk. You can put whatever you like on there. If you have that in your outdoor space, it works really, really well. So take a look around your property if you have access to outdoor space, and see if you have anything that can provide a nice flat surface to put your altar on. It doesn't have to be a tree trunk. It can be a pile of stones. It can be really whatever you have. Take a look around with a critical eye and see if there's somewhere that you kind of like that you might like to set up an altar. And like I said, you can set it up directly on the ground if you like. Not everybody likes that. Not everyone is comfortable sitting on the ground, especially if you have a disability. That may not work for you. But if you do want to set up your altar on the ground, there's no problem with that either. It is really a wonderful experience to set your altar up right on the grass and sit right down on the ground. But you certainly don't have to do that. Look around, find what works for you, and if you have to, just use your side table in your bedroom. You can even mount shelves on the wall and use those shelves as your altar. It's okay to have a tiered, stacked altar. It works just fine. So ultimately, you want to find out what works for you. And once you figure out what works for you, remember you don't have to stick with it. If you change your mind, if you decide you don't really like this, you would rather move outside and use a tree trunk, or you'd rather set your altar up on the wall using shelves, you can completely and totally do that. You are not locked in. Just because you make a decision when you first start your practice doesn't mean you have to stick with it 5 years later. So be flexible, be open to changing up what you've decided. Remember, you don't ever have to stick with something if it's not working for you. It's okay to experiment a little bit, try a few different things, see where you want your altar, see how you want your altar to look, just even the table you're using. You might have a very specific way you want your altar to appear, and that's fine too. So absolutely take the time to set up your altar table before you pick your altar cloth and your tools. Just make sure that whatever you do, you are happy with what you've got. That is about it for tonight. We will come back next week with yet another video. Blessed be.